Right, Frank Portioli. I have said that right, haven't I?
You're not the first one to get that wrong. It's okay.
Yeah. Is it Italian?
It's Portinari.
Right. Okay.
Portinari.
Um.
Kick the French.
Yeah. So we did one a couple of years back, but this
Yeah.
one I'm really interested in, and I'll tell you why. So this is all about Camden, the Darkside, the tour, the official tour, which obviously you're a walk encyclopedia of Camden. Now, Alex Reid, a good friend of mine, he's always in Camden. He rings me. I'm in drinking Camden, this, and I remember I was with him in London last year in the West End somewhere, and because I've always been obsessed with the East End. I like South London. I like West London. You know, West London is, where the Soho, where the music capital is, if you like. The East End's where the boxing comes from. South London, so many different things. Your Charlie Chaplin's, the Richards. There's so many, and the North London. I remember saying to Alex, I'm not really bothered about, and he was like, Jamie, shut up. Anyway, he said, and he got a bit annoyed with me. Now, this is a gospel truth. I think I might have told you. So I was sleeping rough with last year for charity, and I left Alex in the West End, and I said to this guy, I said, which way is the East End, mate? He went, that way. So basically, long story short, I walked 3 miles across the city of the London, and I aimed for the East End, and then basically I ended up in North London. But not only did I end up in North London, I ended up in Camden. Now, I said to Alex the days after, I said, I owe you an apology. I said, I spent the whole day there, and I had one of the best days ever, and it was totally, utterly, completely accidental. So I've known of Camden for the music place, obviously Amy Winehouse, this year in particular, the Holly Arms, which is the pub for Baby Reindeer.
Yeah.
I've kind of almost become a bit obsessed with Camden since last December. Me and you have meant to catch up. Lost my phone the other month. Old age got me to the week, but I will shock you, honestly. I literally look at the next couple of weeks. Anyway, you do a tour, which is the official tour, the Darkside of Camden. Where did that come from, Frank? Because before we want to get into Camden and all the interesting things, and it's far more than your Amy Winehouse and all that. It's Walter Sickert, the Jack the Ripper suspect. So officially, there's 167 suspects on Scotland Yard files. Walter Sickert was one. I know the author Patricia Cornwell has spent millions of her own money. She is convinced that he was the guy, but there's so many other interesting part and links, all linked back to Camden, if you like. But so where are you from originally, Frank?
Well, I am from Camden, but what I'll say is what you know today, or we know today as Camden. When I was born, there was no such place. There was no such place as the London Borough of Camden. Yeah. It was made up of 3 different boroughs. One was Hampstead, which was very affluent. As you come down, you then got St Pancras, which was very tough, poor, working class, and then to the south of the borough you had Holborn, which I would say Holborn was quite affluent in the sense that that's where Hampton Garden is and parts of the West End, so quite a lot of money. But equally there were some parts of Holborn that were quite poor, quite destitute, and some genius decided, well, they might have decided that if you lump us all in together, we'll all be equal, which has always made me laugh, because I can't imagine too many people living in Hampstead had an outside toilet, had a tin bath hanging up on a nail in the yard. But unless it's became trendy, and they might do it, like they nick everything else from working class people. But so Camden wasn't a borough until the 1st of April 1965. So not that old a borough, really.
Yeah, and these days it's, I mean, synonymous with madness. So Camden is very, like for instance, I didn't, as I said, I'd heard of it. Alex always drank in it, so I accidentally walked in his place, and then I got lost. So then I got lost in the market. I remember seeing the boxing gym, which is, so I was completely and utterly lost, to the point where I had to ring the wife and say, because I walk everywhere in London, I'm not one for the tube. And I said, look, because I never carry them Oyster cards or not like that. And she said, just get, and I was just completely stuck. But it's in my head, it's a trendy place. There's lots of bars, there's lots of music. But you do a tour, right? So I'm going to put the links. I'm going to share this later on. Obviously, a lot of I've watched a lot of your stuff, Frank, for a couple of years now. I've seen you busy. You were meeting tourists the other day outside. Where was it? Was it a serial killer place where you met him?
Yeah, it's the vaults, what they call the vaults under Waterloo Station, and they're doing a serial killers exhibition. And so I just thought, you know what, I'll go along with some of my literature. And when they're all queuing up to go in, and clearly when the other lot are coming out, it just provided me with a great opportunity to pass out some literature to people. And it was very well received, I have to say.
Yeah. So you've got this tour, right? You're the main guy. How many tours do you do a week?
Well, I tend to do it, I advertise it so that it's at the weekends, but I also stress that I do a lot of networking. I go to a lot of networking events, and I stress that it can be a bespoke tour. If people want to do it at other times, if they want to do it in the evening, if they want to end up in a pub, if they want some food provided, all that can be done. I mean, particularly coming up to the Christmas period, it's become a thing now where a lot of business owners and managers, etc., they dread January, because they suddenly get reports back from their staff where there's been impropriety, shall we call it, office parties and events away from the office. Suddenly people decide to tell their manager what they really think about him, or clearly some sort of sexual assaults take place. So in January, that's when it all gets heard. So there was a survey, and people are looking for alternatives to just a pub crawl, or alcohol-based events. So I clearly advertise it as saying, look, this is fun, it's educational, it's also healthy. If you do want to remain behind afterwards and have a drink, that's them people's choice. So yeah, so it can be a pretty bespoke thing. It can be, your friends, it can be your work colleagues, your staff, your clients. It's whatever people. I try to give whatever people want.
So on your tour, right? What kind of things can people expect? Then is it? So it's not like, I mean, I've been to London. I was there the other week. I think it was the 5th time in a year being. So I've seen the Jimi Hendrix tours. I've seen the Jack the Ripper tours, the Cray tours, the Charles Dickens tours. What is your tour? What does it entail?
Well, I think mainly, I mean, what happened was I was assisting somebody who was doing a gangster tour bus.
Yeah.
And we had a difference of opinion, and we parted ways. And friends of mine said, Frank, why don't you do your own tour? And I said, look, it's a big exercise to get a bus, etc. You've got to have a drive. There's so many things you've got to do. It's a big investment of time and money. But the main thing was to be able to do that in around Camden would be almost impossible because of the one-way systems, being able to park up, etc. It just wasn't really viable. So someone said to me, why don't you do your own walking tour? You're from Camden, you've always lived in Camden, and you've got a lot of knowledge, folklore, etc. Things that are true and things that I know aren't true, if you like. So that was the idea. And Camden is pretty much, because of Camden Lock mainly, it's known for the lock. It's known for the markets, the street food, the street art, the famous music venues, etc. And obviously the famous people that have lived there and worked there. But no one's ever done a tour that covered the dark side of Camden. So I started off with about 10 stories. That quickly grew to about 15 and then 20, etc. And then things that connected one story to another story. And also in some cases, I knew the people that were part of the stories, which made it even more fascinating. But what also happened was I realised myself, I was reminiscing from when I was growing up in the original St Pancras. And it's the social history as well that I comment on. So what probably once would have been a walk-in tour of an hour and a half has become more like 2.5 hours. And when people say, how long does the tour take? I tend to say, I can only go as fast as the slowest person. And there's various points where people want to engage more. So where it may have taken you 5 minutes last week at that particular location, if you've got someone who's really interested in what you're talking about, it might take you 10 minutes at that location or even 15. And as you'll see, that eventually there are some of those stories are also connected. You've mentioned Walter Sickert. Well, yes, he was associated with the Jack the Ripper murders, but he was also associated with a more local murder to Camden. I only found out last week who his father-in-law was, who's famous in Camden, to the degree he's actually got a statue. So it's forever expanding. It's I'm learning more every week. It's and which is why it's taken far longer than it was in its original format. But I think people would be surprised how much criminality is associated with Camden. People obviously in this day and age have got this airy-fairy view of Camden. But back in the 20s and the 30s, all the way through up until the 60s, there were some pretty naughty characters. And if you take into account that, for example, in the early 70s, there was a Sunday newspaper that had a magazine, and it named either the worst 5 or 6 streets in the United Kingdom. So that would have incorporated Belfast, Glasgow, Liverpool. I think it said Manchester. I think Newcastle probably got a mention. I'd be surprised if Birmingham didn't. But London did. And the road that they chose was Charlton Street in Somers Town, which is in the middle of the borough of St Pancras, i.e. Camden. So that was the 70s. Back in the 30s, in a London newspaper, the most violent street in London was named as Litcham Street, which has now been renamed Athlone Street. And it was a street where they always had to have 2 or 3 police officers patrolling that street. I didn't know that. I'd heard rumours about it. But after doing research, I actually found out that was true. So there's lots of elements of Camden that people don't know because there's never been an opportunity to talk about it like we're talking about it now.
And didn't it have its links with the likes of your Jack Spot Commas or your Billy Hills, Albert Dams? Yeah,
Billy Hill was born.
Right
in what was then St Pancras.
Yeah.
He would. People still know him today. You can talk to older people today, and they'll know him. They'll know that have known his mother and other family members.
I'm just trying to think. He died about 72, didn't he? 71, 72.
It wasn't that long. Yeah. I mean, I'm saying that now. I mean, that's 60 years ago. But to a certain generation, it's not. It's not that long ago. But he would have been associated, a particular pub he was associated with was called the Brighton in Camden High Street, which you would know now as the Blues Kitchen. You may have seen that as you was coming up Camden High Street on the left-hand side. It's now called the Blues Kitchen. That was the Brighton. Now, that was the kind of unofficial headquarters of the Camden, what was known then as the Camden Town Mob. So that so it was always Camden.
Yeah, I've read about them.
Yeah, it wasn't. So it was Camden Town, but it wasn't in the borough of Camden. It would have been in the borough of St Pancras in those days, and that's where they were based. That's where the Camden Town mob were based, and clearly that's what he had association with that, and just down the road is a pub called the Southampton, which has now been named the Littleton Arms after the jazz player sort of Humphrey Littleton. But that was the site of a very famous battle in the 20s, and that was between the racecourse gangs. So that would have involved the Sabinis. Basically, the Sabinis turned up in 2 or 3 taxis, and they attacked people from the Camden Town gang in the south, just outside the Southampton. 2 of them got shot. 2 of the main men got shot, and people did do time for that. But there was always alliances made, between. Sometimes it would be the Sabinis and the Hoxton gang. Sometimes it would be with a Jewish gang. You've got
the Yiddishers.
The Yiddishers and so on, which originally, Alfred Solomon, not Alfie Solomon, it's Alfie
Peaky
Solomon.
Blinders. Yeah, that's what
that's been butchered because they're showing as I would call him, Alfred Solomon. They're showing him as a practicing Jew, and he never was. He was secular, and he was a very, very smartly dressed man. He certainly didn't have any locks, that's for sure. But I suppose to emphasise that he was Jewish, the creators of the programme portrayed him that way. Now, although he was associated with the East End and the Yiddishers, eventually he did come to Camden, and he would use the same pub. He would use what was then the Brighton. But under the old ABC bakery, which was the ABC was the aerated bread company, he had a distillery. He had an illegal distillery, on what some call a spieler, So occasionally he would be an ally of the Camden Town mob, but other times he would align himself with a completely different gang from a different part of London. So, and that happened quite a lot. And on one occasion, they lured the chap from Birmingham, from the Brummagans, who they were forever fighting with over the race, the proceeds of the race courses, and they set about him and they shot him, and they were lucky to get off. They were lucky, and that was only around the back of King's Cross Station. That was just around the back of King's Cross Station. So there's a lot of gangster activity throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s, and right up to the 60s.
Yeah. Of course, you're talking about obviously the big. I am probably going to be there in a couple of weeks. It's obviously that famous fight with Jack Spot Common, Albert Dimes, which was in Soho, the fight that never was. And then, of course, he was Slash 56. That was Frankie Fraser and Bobby Warren, which was Frank Warren's uncle. And that's when he just kind of disappeared. But there was that mentality, wasn't there? But do you cover a lot of that on your tour, where they actually like the locations, but like 100 years on?
Yeah, because you can't. Because as I say, partly what I talk about is truth. I mean, they're true stories. Some of them have obviously been embellished. Yeah, and that's for me to explain to people. And some of it is folklore. It just never, it just never happened. Or people have put their spin on it. But even in more modern times, you had the Verizon robbery in St Pancras, with Terry Ellis, who's a personal friend. Now a lot of people didn't realise that he actually came from Camden Town.
No, I didn't.
And you've got people like Terry Ellis. I beg your pardon, Terry Ellis, Johnny Massey. Who did nearly 43 years in prison, and he lives 10 minutes away from where I'm sitting now. And
of course, there's a prison close by. Is it Pentonville?
Well, Pentonville is technically in Islington. I mean, it's what everyone calls the Caledonian Road. So technically that is Islington. But yeah, if you were being remanded to a local prison, you'd probably get sent to Pentonville, maybe the Scrubs in West London, or maybe Wandsworth. But yeah,
of course. I mean, you can't mention Camden without mentioning Amy Winehouse. She has a statue there. She was in many, many pubs there. I mean, obviously, it's your manor. Did you see Amy around then when she was alive?
Yeah, and I suppose if you're a fan, and I wasn't a great fan, I can appreciate, what a lovely voice she had.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too judgmental, but people that tend to deal with drugs is a bit of a no-no for me. That doesn't mean I cannot recognise somebody's talent, and she was clearly talented, and very much a big part of Camden's social history. Although she predominantly used the Hawley Arms in Hawley Road, there are other venues that she was clearly known in as well. She had a flat 5-10 minute walk away from there as well. And then there's other people that are associated with her. That Pete Doherty, for example. I mean, she's quite close to him. So I mean, I mentioned a lot of the social side of it as well. It's not all gangsters. I mean, there's some of it. There's terrorism. There's witchcraft. There's crimes of passion. There's serial murderers. There's serial rapists. I mean, I'll get one little myth out of the way for you. Dick Turpin. Now, when we were growing up, because we lived so close to Parliament Hill Fields and Hampstead Heath, we grew up playing highwaymen, and Dick Turpin being the most famous one. Well, I'd be very surprised. Allegedly, he'd robbed people and he'd hide under the Red Arches Bridge. Well, God, if you can't spot a man sitting on a horse underneath a bridge, you shouldn't really be a copper, should you? And but we grew up on this folklore. Well, I'll be very surprised if he ever rode through Hampstead Heath, because for a start, he was part of a gang from Essex. Yeah, and and you read of this famous journey on his horse. Now, I don't care if you're watching The Chase, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. When they asked the question, what was the name of Dick Turpin's horse? 9 out of 10 people would say Black Bess, and they'll get the question right. It'll be acknowledged as right. The fact of the matter is, an author wrote a book about the legend of Dick Turpin, because he was almost like another Robin Hood figure. The idea that the impression was he robbed the rich to help the poor. No, he robbed anybody to help himself. But he started to appear in plays, poems, etc. So the myth grew, the legend grew. And this famous story where he rode through the night up to York, and he eventually went back to his old trick. He changed his name, but he went back to rustling horses, etc. And eventually he was caught doing that, and he was put in York prison. And when he tried to smuggle out a letter, it was intercepted, basically. And it was discovered that the prisoner was him. it was Dick Turpin. Now, the fact of the matter is, during this chap's story in his book, almost 100 years later, he named the horse Black Bess.
Mm.
So it was never ever called Black Bess. Dick Turpin clearly never called his horse Black Bess, you know. So there's some of the folklore stories that, if people want to go along with it, fantastic. But I do make a point of trying to tell people the truth as well. But
I mean, to be honest, Camden is, you know, you're doing your tour, but it's certainly in my lifetime, it's becoming more trendier and more captivating. You know, these days I'm in Morrison's and you see bottles of beer saying Camden beer. I don't know whether you've noticed it.
Yeah, the brewery.
As I said, I stumbled across the place totally by accident. And you know, it's been in my head to go back. And it's like, so your tours, you touch basically on everything, don't you? It's not criminality. It's not just Amy Winehouse. You know what I mean? Am I right in saying Madness were from Camden as well?
Yeah, they used to play in the Dublin Castle, but they were from here. I mean, they were from Camden. I mean, one of them's girlfriend used to live just at the bottom of the road from where I am now. It's the thing is, I called it the dark side of Camden, and it was originally to do with the dark side that people just would not have ever. You know, 9 out of 10 people who come to Camden would never have heard of these stories. But I cannot avoid, as while I'm doing the walk, which starts outside St Pancras Station and finishes at Hampstead Heath. There's reasons why it starts and ends there, because it goes through the spine of Camden. And yeah, as I say, I mean, if you go to, as we pass, for example, what's now called St Pancras Gardens, that was once St Pancras Cemetery. And there is a church there that they found very difficult to date, but they reckon it's the 9th or 10th century. They say it is the oldest place of worship in Europe. So that's some statistic. Now, I also found out that during the time of Henry VIII, that Oliver Cromwell billeted 50 of his men and horses in that church. The Beatles' White Album, you know, their famous White Album.
Yeah.
The picture of them sitting on a bench in a park is St Pancras. Is St Pancras Cemetery. You know, there's a famous tree there that's unfortunately now fallen down. It fell down last winter. The Hardy tree, and the story of why all the headstones were placed around the tree. You've got the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, who herself was an author and very much a feminist in her day. You know, very much women's rights. She's buried there. You've got the man, the architect of the Bank of England is buried there, Sir John Stone. His wife has got a mausoleum there, and anyone that sees the mausoleum, I say, does it remind them of anything in particular? The shape of it, no one's got it right yet, but it's actually in the shape of a telephone box. Because and the man who designed the mausoleum went on to design the famous London phone boxes. And one last one, who was originally buried there, he was actually born next door in the St Pancras workhouse, and he was a municipal road sweeper and rat catcher. And he lived in Somerstown. He lived in Phoenix Road in Somerstown, but was buried in that cemetery. And that is the man who created the Pearly King and Queens. And that was him.
Right, I never knew that.
Yeah, and most people associate it with the East End. Yeah. It wasn't from the East End at all. It was actually from St Pancras in Camden.
Because when you're talking of London's dark history, you know, Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper, Bethnal Green, the Cray Twins, and in my head, I never thought of Camden, but then the more obviously I've researched it and read about it, and I love watching documentaries, and Camden has been a kind of a right naughty little place, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's just, look, I see it now. I kind of look at it. It's become a massive interest to me. You know, as I say, I'm learning. I'm learning all the time. You know, you obviously mentioned Walter Sickert, and I've mentioned he's responsible for the murder of who is thought to be of Emily Dimmock. You know, who had her throat slashed, laid out on a bed, you know, semi-naked. Well, Walter Sickert did a painting of a woman with her throat cut, semi-naked, laying on a bed. And the police knew that he had a very macabre interest in death.
Yeah.
And that's why he was more associated with the Ripper case rather than the actual Emily Dimmock case. But his father-in-law was a man called Richard Cobden. And Richard Cobden was a Liberal MP. Eventually, he was a Liberal independent as well. Now, he's got a statue at outside Mornington Crescent Station that is a 2-minute walk from a plaque on the wall on the house where Walter Sickert used to live. Richard Cobden, who was his father-in-law, actually, he was somebody who fought for the repeal of the Corn Laws and other, you know, social injustices. And that statue was paid for partly by a large donation from Napoleon. So you find lots of different links between in a very small area.
Yeah. Can I just ask you though, Frank? I know this is not your thing, but obviously, kind of Camden's kind of classed as, you know, the in place to be, and you're there a lot. Do you kind of see a lot of the famous faces? You know, the pop stars, the Gallic. You know, the not in. Do you see them around?
Well, I'm just looking for something because I know there's something that would interest you, you in particular. Let me just see where it's. I've got it. I'll mention it in a moment. Yeah, but I think we're quite blasé. If you've always lived in Camden, I think you get a little bit blasé about it because it's just fluid. It's just a natural thing. So, because I probably, from a music point of view, there were two things you did when I was growing up in the 70s. You tended to go to football on a Saturday, or sometimes during the week, you know, and then you go and watch you go and watch a gig. You know, you go and take in a music venue on the Sunday. I mean, sometimes you do it on a Friday night. You know, even the Dominion Tottenham Court Road, which is, I did a lot of venues. I did a lot of concerts. You know, that's technically in Camden. So we were used to going to those you know, you had Dingwalls, you had what's now Coco's has been the Music Machine, it's been the Camden Palace, the famous Dublin Castle, the Roundhouse at Chalk Farm, you know, very famous for rock bands in its day, in a sense. So yeah, well, yeah, you do see people. But I think we kind of accept that that's a bit like if you live. I suppose if you live near a football ground, you know, you get used to seeing players going to training or, you know, other people associated. Yeah, I wouldn't say you're blasé, but you just get used to it. So yeah, it's not a big thing unless you're looking for it. If it's your particular thing, then I suppose, you know, it's it's big in your life, to you personally. But me, no, not so much because it's a bit like I'm going to Bruges next week for a long weekend. It's my wife's birthday. We go to Bruges and we go, wow, you know, we've been there quite a few times. What a lovely town, you know, it's clean, it's safe. Because Camden is so mad and so hectic.
Yeah. Well, one thing that surprised me, Frank. Yeah. One thing that surprised me, so it was a couple of weeks before I ended up accidentally going there. But Junior Witter, whose book I'm writing, he said, "Oh, I'm going. I won't be able to speak to you this week. I'm going to Camden." So why? What's in Camden? So Junior's Caribbean, West Jamaican, I think. But when I got there, obviously, when I was lost, I was talking about 7 hours. I spent the day there. There's a huge kind of African, Caribbean, like all the foods and all that. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 stores. I'm talking about a full high street. And it was mesmerizing with it. Just literally had so many different cultures. So there is I totally got when I was there why Junior, who lives in Rotherham, would come down and spend the weekend in Camden Market.
Yeah. Well, you like your boxing, clearly, And did you see the blue plaque for Tom Sayers?
No.
No, you see. So as you go up Camden High Street, just before you got to 2 pubs on opposite each other, the Oxford Arms and the Elephant's Head. If you're on a bus, you see it. If you're down, if you're just walking along, unless you're on the other side of the road, maybe, and you happen to glance up. But Tom Sayers was a champion bare knuckle fighter, very famous, and they say that his funeral procession went on and on and on up to Highgate Cemetery, and he was a real celebrity. And in one particular fight, it went on for 61 rounds, and he only reached 61 rounds of bare knuckle fighting. And the only reason it got stopped, so technically he did lose, but the reason it got stopped eventually was because he had blood in his eyes, and he just genuinely couldn't see what he was doing. And if you go to Highgate Cemetery, which is still in the borough of Camden, he's buried there. But by the side is also a statue of a dog, and that was his dog, and the dog was called Lion. Also in that cemetery is one of the and he had no association with Camden, but for some reason he's buried in Highgate Cemetery, and I only found that out by accident. And that was the man who actually planned the robbery. So
the Great Train Robbery.
Yeah, Bruce Reynolds.
Oh wow! Am I right in saying George Michael's in there as well?
I'm not sure. It would make sense if he was.
I think he is. I'm very positive he is. Highgate.
Yeah. He lived in Highgate, yeah. So, and that was, that's round the corner. It's, it's the start of that cemetery is in off of Swains Lane. So,
is that really walking distance to the high street?
Not really, and I have to be careful because the borough of Camden is shaped a bit like a leg of lamb. So there's quite a lot of it at the top, and then it sort of comes down. It's a bit like a leg of lamb. You couldn't possibly, you could in a day if you started in the south of the borough. I find it difficult because I start off at St Pancras because most of what I talk about is north of St Pancras. So going up from Somers Town, Camden Town, and Kentish Town, we call it the 3 towns. All of those would have then been, say, the borough of St Pancras. If you take the south of the borough, Holborn, that's where Hatton Garden is. So I do mention, that the Hatton Garden, the famous Hatton Garden robbery. I also clearly mentioned that, the Sabini family, who definitely ran that part of London, all ran Saffron Hill, etc., Holborn, Clerkenwell, and so on. They very much ruled most. I went to a family funeral last year, and people because I hadn't seen my real father since I was about 2. I think I got to meet him finally when I was about 40. and he died a few months later. So it's just as well we did actually meet. But when I went to an auntie's funeral, who I didn't even know was an auntie, I suddenly met all these different generations of family members who were all Portinaris, you know. And one of them just happened to say, "You do realise that your granddad used to work for the Sabinis?" Well, I never knew that.
Wow.
I never knew that.
So you tour, as I said, I'm going to put all the links in this. You've got a Facebook group, which I kind of look at now and again. So I'm going to put all the links in this. So anyone who fancies kind of think, oh, you know, obviously Frank's very approachable. And I think your tour's grown all the time. As I said, I'm seeing the pictures. And am I right in saying you mix it up, Frank? You change it now and again?
Well, only in the sense it's become so, you know, it's fluid now that I can't walk past. If I find something out about something, I can't not mention it. Yeah. So, you know, if you take into account, you know, what the reason we finished at Hampstead is because that's where Ruth Ellis, you know, the last British woman to be hung in this country, that's where she shot her lover outside the Magdala Arms. There's a reason why. You know, while we finished there, but but in between, you've got people like Jimmy Brown. I mean, Jimmy Brown, you know, went on a piece of work to rob something, and the security guard ran towards him, and the gun went off. He ends up doing 18 years. But many years later, he finds himself in a position where he's a bodyguard to Amy Winehouse. So again, there's all these crossovers, and he then becomes part of a famous case where he's going to parties and he's looking after. Is it the fella called Fielding? I'm trying to think of his first name. He's been on various shows on television, and they were coming out of Noel. I think is it Noel Fielding? He's called. He wears quite elaborate outfit. Well, he was looking after him. You know, Jimmy eventually was looking after him, and they come out of a party one night, and the policeman handled him, and his leg was broken, Jimmy, and he got quite a sizable payout. So he couldn't have known after doing an 18-year sentence that he would find himself in, you know, elaborate parties, all connected with Camden again. All connected.
And am I right in saying, when you mentioned Hampstead Heath, is that the infamous toilets that's always linked with George Michael in there?
I do point that out as we pass.
Well, I'm like the biggest George Michael fan in the world, so obviously that's there. I take. Sorry,
that's probably the last 15 minutes of the tour. Before I tell the last three stories, we pass those particular toilets at Southend Green, you know.
And there's still things happen like that?
Well, I believe they call it cottaging, don't they? I think is that the term that they used to use for that? I dare say, listen, when we were youngsters, when we were kids, you know, we were always told to stay away from certain
right.
And even in Camden High Street, there was a very, very famous pub, the Mother Black Cat. There's two pubs that had cap in the name, Mother Black Cat, Mother Red Cat. And the Mother Black Cat in the 60s and 70s was a very famous establishment for gay men. I think lesbians eventually went there, but it was predominantly gay men. And apparently, you know, the cabaret acts and etc. You know, the entertainment apparently was really good, and it was very famous pub, and it's been shut for years. And I can't believe that it's such a social history wise, its importance to Camden.
Yeah,
I cannot believe it's still standing there, empty. And then of course across the road you've got the Mother Red Cap, and the Mother Red Cap is famous for the family that owned that were into witchcraft, and the mother and father eventually were hung for witchcraft. But old Mother Red Cap, she was called Mother Red Cap because she was balding and she used to wear a red cap. and she was poisoning. She was poisoning people, and they say burning them, or certainly burnt one of her victims. And they eventually arrested her in a small cottage just across the road, Bayham Street, just across from Bayham Street, where they came across her anyway, and she'd taken one of her own potions that she'd knocked up, and they allegedly gave it to her cat, and they reckon all the hair of the cat dropped out. So I suspect a lot of that was folklore.
Yeah. So as I said, Frank, I'm going to put all your links. You know, you're on Twitter. You've got the Facebook page. I don't know whether you're on Instagram, are you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. Yeah, that's under my own name. That would be under my own name.
You're going to send the link, and I'll put it on the bio. Yeah, if anyone's watching this wants to get any more information regarding Frank, regarding his tours, just give him a message. Very, very approachable guy. Was there anything else you wanted to add about the tours?
Well, just to add, just to give you a few tasters, if you like. If you take into account who we refer to as the Camden Ripper, we passed there where he lived. We take into account we passed where what they called the Kindly Killer. We passed where he worked in Kentish Town Road. We talk about the Fox, who lived in Kentish Town. Eventually, was caught in Kentish Town. He was Malcolm Fairley. He was someone that used to break into people's houses and observe them, and he'd make little camps in their house, which is why they called him the Fox. You've got to take into account there's Dr. Crippen, lived in Kentish Town. That's a very famous case. You've got the case of the man that committed suicide twice. Very interesting. Yeah, exactly. But when I tell the story, it does become a lot clearer. But it's true. He was seen as the man that committed suicide twice. And there's still various, a lot of gang culture. Young men. A lot of Kentish Town Road was known for a while as the murder mile. Very bad instance. I mean, we had 5 shootings in one night. My local market down the road, Queen's Crescent, had its own distinct gang. Agar Grove, which is where the woman who had the throat cut, Emily Dimmock, that's where she was murdered. There's still a lot of stories to be told. The first Metropolitan Police officer that was murdered in Somerstown, St Pancras. So basically, for people who think,
Camden is Amy Winehouse, music, markets, it's not. There's a sinister, extremely dark part, a history, if you like, that's the key point. It's history. It's not bull crap. It happened once upon a time in Camden.
Well, it's become. I've started to write a book now because it has become a fascination for me. It's how can I put it? I like social and political history and so on to be recorded, and it to be as accurate as possible. And so I mean, something I would want my own grandchildren to know. I'd like my grandchildren to take a book into school and say, not necessarily that their granddad wrote it, but this is part of our history. Where we're being educated, this is some of the past. I mean, people say that Boudicca or Boudica, whichever way you want to, pronounce it, the Iceni, queen, that she's buried under platform 9 and 10 of St Pancras Station. Well, it's on the basis that Battlebridge Road is named after a battle, the last battle between the Romans and the Iceni tribe. She died there. It makes sense she got buried within a couple of 100 yards. Well, Battlebridge Road wasn't named after that battle because that never took place. So she's certainly not buried under platform 9 or 10 of St Pancras Station. But folklore-wise, it's it's great. It's nice to have those stories. But as I say, I do try to give an accurate account, which people that come on the tour will find out about the famous bullets in the wall of the Magdala pub where Ruth Ellis shot her lover. So everything's
So
got
if anyone wants to message Frank, as I said, I'm going to put the links in the bio. Frank, it's always a pleasure, mate. We will catch up. Yeah. Sorry?
I was going to say, no, I just wanted to say I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
I've got nearly 11,000 over the years.
To give other people an opportunity as well, to have a taste of a different side of Camden.
Do you know, I'm going to speak with Alex this week and I'm going to say, we need to go and have a tour.
Yeah, sure.
Because, and as I said, he's rang me before and I've been like, why? And he's like, I'm in Camden. And I thought, I don't give a hoot about North London. And then I accidentally walked in the place last December. It was funny because obviously, I'm a fanatical Celtic supporter. And I was sleeping rough for a couple of days. And what's the pub? It's like a sports bar. Is it the World's End or something like that?
It's traditionally a music. It's that was the old Mother Redcap.
It's a big bar. It's like a sports bar.
Well, it can be a sports bar. I mean, it's mainly a music venue because in the downstairs you've got the underworld and. But did you not land up in the Sheep Haven at morning?
Do you know? It was just I remember walking down the street.
I'll tell you why I ask, because your fascination with the Jack the Ripper and so on, and Walter Sickert. Where Morton Crescent Station is, right opposite where the famous gangster battle took place in the Southampton. That's the start of Morton Crescent. And if you follow that round, just round the back, there's a pub there called the Sheep Haven Tavern, and that's where the Celtic supporters go to watch the game.
No, but I didn't. But you know what? What it was is because I rang the wife and she said, Jamie, just get a. I remember walking. It was dark by then. And then I found the nearest tube station was that Morning Crescent place. And I got the tube from there. So that's when obviously I'll be able to meet you. But anyway, my story was basically I was homeless. I went in a pub in Camden. I watched Celtic get beat. And I've never been so glad to go back out in the cold and be homeless.
Well, funny enough, in December, I'm going up to Ibrox because my team, Tottenham's playing Rangers in the...
I tell you what, he'll get a warm reception, Big Ange.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, I was up there for the pre-season game a few years ago, but he wasn't in charge then. So yeah, I'll be surprised if the boys don't have a banner or two about him.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, you need to keep him, because that guy is a few years ago before Man City got Pep Guardiola. Vincent Kompany and everyone went to the board and said, you need to get this guy in. Pep Guardiola said he's the best coach I've ever seen. I know he's having a rocky time, but I don't know. I wouldn't like to see you sack him.
No, he strikes me on what we've not had for a number of years. Is having someone that's going to go into the dressing room.
Yeah, say, you need to back him.
You're good enough for me, or you're not good enough for me.
Yeah,
and then he'll live or die by that. But I'd rather have that.
Yeah, absolutely. He's your man.
Play up to people's personalities, egos, etc. If they sacked him tomorrow, I think he'd still be popular in the sense that he's been his own man. He's and we all know that. We know that on a lot of occasions, players get managers sacked because they don't listen. They don't do what they're asked to do. You can see them all throughout the Premiership. These prima donnas, And in an ideal world, I think he needs time. He needs to pick his own squad. I know they criticise some of his system, but we'll see. Listen, it's a long way to go yet. Long way to go.
But you know what, Frank? It's always a pleasure, my friend. Listen, I'm gonna share this on all of the London things later. So, as I said, anyone who wants to get in touch with Frank about his tours or anything like that, just give him a message. Very, very approachable. Frank, we will catch you up.
One last thing. This is for the sake of anybody that's watching. If you go onto the website, don't be put off because it says there's going to be a tour next Saturday or the Saturday after. It doesn't have to be on that day. It doesn't have to be at that time. If you or a group of friends, colleagues, whatever, want to do it at a specific time, that can be accommodated, because that's the whole idea, to do it when it suits people, it's comfortable, how they want to incorporate it into the whole day. It's inside. I've had stag do's, hen do's. People find lots of different, because they start off with a walking tour and then they finish off the rest of the day in Camden, or the West End. So, by all means, send me an email and we'll have a discussion. And again, thanks to you, Jamie, for giving me the opportunity to speak to other people.
Always a pleasure, mate. And we'll speak very soon again. Take care, my friend. Have a great day. God bless.
Thank you. Cheers, pal.